Say, there's been many times I've gone to scare somebody and their reaction's so aggressive that it scares me back. So in Esther chapter 8, it reminds me of that. In Psalms, it mentions a verse that says, the wicked falls into his own trap. That's the essence of it. And here's kind of what has happened. We have talked about Haman. What had Haman made for Mordecai? Gallows. And we talked about gallows being like this giant stick, and they kind of push the person down on the stick, and it's excruciating, and they don't always die quickly, and they're kind of human kebab almost. And that's morbid, but that's kind of how it was. And so Haman had all this hatred for Mordecai, and Mordecai, he's just trying to follow the Lord, and he's raised his niece up, or cousin up, and to follow the Lord. And we come to chapter 8, and Esther has now been elevated to queen, and she has asked, come on in. Don't be biased, any seat will work. Most of the adults don't bite, so feel free to sit by them. It's all good. I thought y'all might be coming down. So we're talking about Esther. We're in chapter 7. We're talking about, we're in verse 1. So verses 1 through 5 says, so the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen, and the king said unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Esther, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. So what's she doing here? She's revealing what her cousin said not to reveal until the appointed time, and said, will you save my neck? And she continues, for we are sold, this is Esther 7 verse 4, I and my people to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. So here's what happens. We've talked about King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, and we know that he's a fearsome king to appear before, and she goes before him a second time, and her request was, can we have a banquet with Haman? And Haman's ego really couldn't fit inside of this kingdom, and Haman thinks, hey, this is all about me, but he has stepped into his own trap. And Esther goes, and the king says, hey, I'll give you anything. Up to half the kingdom. What do you want? And she goes, I just want to live. Me and my people. So now we see the plea of a courageous queen, but then we see the rage of a tyrant king. So what do you think this guy, this king, how do you think he's going to react? Does he ever react really calmly? Not really. He's always this close to rage. And in verses 5 through 7, we'll see his reaction. Brother Bobby, if you would read those.
Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he that doth assume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, rising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king.
All right, so here's what happens. The king hears this. Oh, your life is being threatened. You're my favorite woman in the kingdom. I chose you out of 25 million women, and your life is being threatened. Who is it? And then she just kind of turns and goes, that dude right there. And the rage fills the king. And he's so enraged, he leaves. He walks out. And so at this time you think, okay, well, maybe Haman has a little time to catch his breath and figure out what he's going to say. And he kind of does, but you ever done something and then made it worse? You ever, when I was a kid, I ripped my pants, my brand new Lee jeans, and then when I got home, I got my grandma to fix them, and I never told my mom, and I put them in the bottom of the drawer, right? And I just thought she'd never find out. But they were brand new, and so she came calling and realized that I had a rip from below the booty all the way up to the edge and wondered, how did that get there? And I was just deathly afraid, and I don't even remember if I got really disciplined, but I made a bad thing worse. I could have just told her what happened. And so here's what Haman does. He goes, oh no, I've messed up. So, verse 8, Haman stands up in verse 7 to make requests for his life to Esther the queen. So he approaches the queen, gets up, please save my life. I'm sorry, and makes up whatever he can. And the king comes in from trying to cool off, and he sees Haman approaching the queen. Verse 8, the king returned out of the palace of the garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. That's not a good look. So this guy who she's already claimed that was going to take her life is now approaching the bed where she's laying, and he's appealing, and the king just goes, what is this fool doing? Then the king said, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So here's what happens. The king walks in. He thinks that she's getting sexually assaulted. He goes, are you an idiot? You going to do this in my house? And as soon as he said that, his servants grab a big old covering, slide it over his head. What is that for? It's an execution veil. So they put him in that and they march him out. And you would say, man, that tide turned kind of quickly. He thought just a day ago or maybe 2 days ago, he thought he was going to be arrayed in royal apparel, paraded around on the king's horse, and everybody was going to elevate him. He had his eyes, I'm sure, on the throne. But instead of wearing a crown, he's wearing an executionary veil, and now he's being marched to his death. So, verse 9, and Harbona, one of the king's chamberlains, said before the king, behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So here we have the trap, the execution that was meant for Mordecai now gets used for Haman. So then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. So the Bible is full of interesting things, and it's very brutal, and it's very specific sometimes. And so what we see here is called irony. You know what that means? It's very ironic, and it's horrible to be on the receiving end of irony like that. And so what he thought he was doing was preparing a gallows for the person he hated. And what ended up happening is the person he hated ended up getting elevated, and he got hanged on his own evil gallows that he had made. It's horrible, but you should beware of your ego. So we see the plea of a courageous queen, the rage of a tyrant king, and Haman falls hard. And we see the fall of a haughty enemy. Now, did Mordecai make that happen? No. God made that happen. Did Mordecai try to go out and kill him before he got killed? No. God made that happen. And now we're going to see the reward of the righteous. Verse 1 of chapter 8. On that day did King Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. All right, so Esther just got enriched. And what do you think she does? She thinks about her cousin. And Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he gave from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So what happens? Haman and all of his stuff and his treasures gets transferred over to Mordecai. And not only that, verse 2. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So why did he take off his ring?
His position.
Yeah.
Second in the kingdom.
Yeah. So he gets turned into what we would consider, who else got turned in it? Joseph. Y'all remember Joseph was second in command? So God has now elevated Mordecai because of his wisdom, because of his patience, and just because God saw fit for it. He's elevated him up to second in command of the kingdom. In verse 3, Esther spake yet again before the king and fell down at his feet and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite and his device that he had devised against the Jews. So what is this device that he is? So Haman was full of devices. One was the gallows, right? The other was something that he had penned. And what had he penned? Y'all remember?
A certain day, all of it from the Jews to kill.
Yeah, so he had written a decree and got it sealed by the king that on a certain day it was open hunting season and you could kill any Jew. And he was going to encourage that because the Jews didn't follow along with the culture of the land, and they were kind of getting to be a nuisance. So let's erase them. Let's have a day where it's all good to kill, and we'll just purge them out. So the king has this written into a decree, and Esther goes, well, is there any way that we can undo this decree? And that one decree can't be undone in those laws. Once it was set, it was signed, sealed, delivered. It's over.
That's the Medes and Persians.
Yeah, that's the law of the Medes and the Persians. If it was put in writing and sealed, it was over. And so he's like, all right, well, I can't do that. But I love Esther, and I want to do something for them. So what can I do? So, verse 4, the king held out his golden scepter toward Esther. Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, if I found favor in his sight and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? So here we have Esther interceding on the behalf of her people. And we say this, Esther is a picture. She's a picture of an intercessor. What is an intercessor? A go-between. And who is the ultimate intercessor?
Jesus.
So the Bible says there is one God and one mediator between God and man. And who is that? The man Christ Jesus. That means Jesus stands in your place. Jesus goes before God, and when you go before God, he doesn't see you, but he sees the righteousness of Christ on your behalf if you're a believer. So can you live? Can you go before God without an intercessor? No. And here we see a small picture of the value of an intercessor. Without an intercessor, you will die. And so Esther intercedes again. In verse 7, then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged, and him have they hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. So number 2 was the rise of the intercessors. Haman's house is transferred to Esther and Mordecai, and Esther intercedes again on the people. And then we get to the culmination of the book, is where God preserves his people. Verse 9 through 14, Adam.
verse 9 says, Then were the king of the scribes called at this time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 73rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and to the deputies, and to the rulers in the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, in every province according to the writings thereof, and unto the people after their language, and unto the Jews according to the writings and according to their language. You said through 14? Where'd you say through?
10 is fine.
10, okay. And he wrote the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by the post, horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries.
All right, so here's what happens. You can't change a decree, but you can make a counter decree. And so he writes something down, and he seals it, and he writes enough copies for it to go out to 127 provinces. That's the original, Pony Express, right? So the original Pony Express, so they didn't just have ponies, they had dromedaries. Y'all know what dromedaries are? Camels.
All
right? So they had
young camel that is it's broad, which means it's the ones that had for breeding. So the king so loved Esther that he was willing to use those that maybe were carrying young to make sure that all the providences got the word.
incredible. So if you didn't hear that, he activated his entire caravan. We'll put it like that. He activated his entire caravan. So that's mules, that's horses, that's camels, even the ones that were supposed to be kept in for breeding. And he says, get on your horse and ride. Get on your camel and ride. And so they do that. So what was on the letters? Verse 11. Wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women's, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon the mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. So here's what the decree was. We understand that there was something in writing. It has been published. But here's an additional publishing. All the Jews are allowed to arm themselves, and they'll kill you. If you want to go kill them, they will be ready. So go ahead, Jews, arm yourselves, and whoever you kill that tries to kill you, you take all their property. So originally the decree was just extinguish the Jews, and now he's going, hey, Jews, be aware, everybody's coming for you. And here's the thing, in the application of this to our life. I didn't know why that happened. When you become a believer, Satan's coming for you. God is on your side, but that doesn't mean you just sit down and let the onslaught of the enemy just bulldoze you over. There's action to be taken here. So God was on their side. God helped them with the decree, but they weren't just going to go, oh, thanks, King, I'll just sit here. They ought to go ahead and get their swords and their shovels and their rakes and whatever weapon they could figure out and arm themselves and go to battle on that day. And so that's what they did. You say, man, this is incredible. This is a little war in Esther. Absolutely. It's beautiful, and it's scary, and it's aggressive. So, verse 15, and Mordecai went out from the presence. This is a story is rewritten, the last thing. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and honor. And in every province And in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. And that's how it ends. That's Esther. So what happens? So the decree's sent out, and the Jews arm themselves, and instead of being killed, they are able to defend themselves. And so the story of Esther ends not with justice served or enemies defeated, but with joy declared and a feast established. I was like, oh man, that sounds like fun. A 2-day feast, he says. So on the very day that the Jews were meant to be destroyed, there's still a feast and a celebration that they celebrate to this day. Okay, the 13th day of Adar became a permanent reminder that God writes better endings than we ever could. So the feast is called the Feast of Purim. It was established to celebrate this great reversal. And I looked it up yesterday, and I probably should have brought donuts today. So they have, on this feast day, they have all these little goodies. And it's somewhat like Halloween because they dress up, and a lot of them dress up like Esther. And they remind themselves of the day that sorrow turned to gladness, fear turned to celebration, and mourning turned to joy. And every year since, the Jewish people have paused to remember that even when God seems hidden, he is still at work. Yes. So Purim is more than a holiday. It's a testimony that God never sleeps. His promises never fail, and his people are never forgotten. So that's the book of Esther. And I got a couple of questions for you.